Hello. I'd like to talk about three very important concepts to our study of government and civics. The first is called the rule of law. The rule of law has been around since ancient Greece times. And it means simply this, that no person should be above the law. Now that may seem like common sense to you and I, but there have been leaders in certain countries, dictators, who have seen the law as something that applied to the people he governed, but not necessarily him or herself. And let me caution you for a minute. Oftentimes in social studies we talk about ideas as just that, ideas, almost in the abstract. And my students are quick to point out, but Mr. Mulvena, the rule of law says that no person's above the law, but I know people who got a really good lawyer and they got out of this or that. Those instances are certainly true. The law is made by individuals. It's made by humans. And sometimes in our history, the laws have been incorrect. We've had laws that upheld segregation, for instance, the separation of people based on race. But we're talking about things in the abstract. And one of the most underlying and fundamental principles to our government and our way of life is called the rule of law, that no person is above the law. The law applies to everyone, and it should apply to everyone equally. We've had presidents in this country who've done things that many considered illegal. Presidents who were impeached, and yet they weren't above the law. The rule of law applied to them. And one president, President Nixon, resigned his office, and the transition of power was peaceful because he knew that he too, even as a president, wasn't above the law. A second fundamental principle has to do with natural or human rights. It's an idea that was talked about in the 18th century, the 1700s, during the period of the Enlightenment by men like Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. And it simply says that people, human beings, have rights just because they exist, because they are. And these are rights that can't be taken away by other people or governments. And again, you might think, Mr. Mulvena, that's obvious. But it wasn't always so obvious. We had rulers and kings and queens who treated people like property. The serfs, for example, were basically slaves. And the rulers of those countries didn't consider those serfs much more than animals that you'd have on a farm. So the idea of human rights, that we are, in fact, all created equal, that these rights are inalienable, is an important part of our government and didn't always exist. In fact, it's only existed for 300 or 400 years. So human rights, natural rights, extremely important. They're the rights that Jefferson talks about in the Declaration of Independence when he says that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are natural or human rights. And yes, I think Jefferson meant to include women when he said men. The third concept has to do with the social contract theory. You see, if you accept that we all have rights, that we all have freedoms, well, where do those freedoms begin and where do they end? The social contract theory tells us. Social contract says that, yes, we have rights and we have freedoms, but we also have the responsibility of making sure we don't impinge or infringe on the rights of others. And that's government's job. Government says to us, if you give up some of your rights, some of your absolute freedoms, we promise to protect you from other people who might impinge or infringe on those rights as well. So I agree that even though I'm somewhat free to go around and swing a baseball bat at an individual or their property, I agree not to do that because government tells me that, Mr. Mulvena, we won't let other people do that to you or your property. That's the social contract theory. You give up some of your rights, and in return, government will protect the rest of the rights you have. These are three incredibly powerful and underpinning ideas that form our government. The rule of law. No one is above the law. We all have natural or human rights which should be protected and respected by others in society and certainly by those in our government. And finally, that we agree to live by a contract, a social contract, in which we give up some of our rights with the expectation that government will protect us.